Celes Rune Knight is the latest spoiler from the Final Fantasy Commander box, and it's actually one of the alternate commanders spoiled. And I actually thought this one was really interesting, so I wanted to make a dedicated video just covering some of the quick bit strategies for it, go over some cards that I think are going to be auto includes in this deck. There's obviously so many ways to build this just because this is an alternate commander. A lot of times people look at the alternate commander as a slightly weaker version of this, but I think there's a lot of powerful parts to this card. So if you want to see more coverage like this for future alternate commanders, let me know in the comment section down below. Let me know what you want to see. And of course, before I even get there, before I get to the cards, let me know what are some cards, just reading this, that you think are going to be auto includes. Let's see if we overlap as the video continues. Now, Celes Rune Knight is a Mardu commander, 1 red, white, and black for a legendary creature human wizard knight 4/4. When Celes enters, discard any number of cards, then draw that many cards +1. So that's kind of nice, eh? So when it enters, you're gonna be able to flicker it for like plus on cards. If you're able to flicker it over and over again, you're gonna be able to draw more and more and more cards. But what happens when you discard? I mean, it's draw, but what's the payoff? Because now those cards are entering your graveyard. Well, whenever one or more other creatures you control enter, if one or more of them entered from a graveyard or was cast from a graveyard, put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. Now, this is kind of interesting. There's some +1/+1 counter synergies, there's some reanimation synergies. There's obviously a lot of creatures or cards that I can think of that can be cast from the graveyard. Obviously, we want to focus on creatures in this case, and we want ones that enter the battlefield, right? So we don't want cards that, we don't want cards that necessarily create creatures as flashback. I don't believe that works here. We want a creature that we can bring back from the graveyard, or we can cast from the graveyard, or enters maybe through some type of trigger that can bring that back. Now, notably, this is an alternate commander for Terra, Herald of Hope. Now, I think Terra in a lot of ways is actually, it almost feels like you build them completely different. Like they have a lot of synergies together, but I almost want to have them as separate decks, right? So Terra being that Mardu commander, legendary human wizard warrior, 3/3. At the beginning of combat on your turn, mill 2 cards, Terra gains flying until the end of turn. So a little bit of unblockable or some combat evasion. And then whenever Terra deals combat damage to a player, you may pay 2. When you do, return target creature with power 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. Now, obviously, there is some synergy here with the other commander, with Celes in this case. But I think in many ways, because Terra is able to enable herself and also get some hard reanimation in there, which I think is kind of nice. Like, you can just have a creature with power 3 or less that's like super high costed and only pay 2 to bring it back. And now obviously you're going to need some evasion with this. It has built-in flying, but you don't want to just get blocked by things that have reach. So make sure you're going to have ways to enable like trampling and stuff. But I don't want to go too far in how to build Terra, because I want to make sure we're going into how to build Celes. So we're going to break this down. I'm going to largely ignore the creatures entering back, because I think there's cards like Bloodghast and stuff, because like those cards are very easy to kind of keep in mind as to how we can enter them in. Bloodghast is probably like one of the easiest kind of auto includes in here. And I'm actually just realizing I should probably just include it in here, even though I'm speaking about it. So let's just bring it up right here. So Bloodghast recent reprint actually, so even more kind of accessible that way. Bloodghast is black for a vampire spirit 2/1 that says this creature can't block, but this creature has haste as long as your opponent has 10 or less cards. So for all of my dredge players out there, my modern dredge players, you're probably missing this card in many ways. Whenever a land you control enters, you may return this card from the graveyard to the battlefield. So very easy way to reuse something like Celes' ability to kind of put 1/1 counters on things and get that trigger over and over again. If you want to build something up large, maybe you have something like a fetch land. So you play the Bloodghast, maybe sacrifice it to something, play a fetch land on the first ETB, you get the Bloodghast, sacrifice it again, everything gets a 1/1 counter, enters the graveyard, you fetch, get another land, sacrifice the Bloodghast to something, everything gets a 1/1 counter, it's back in the graveyard, maybe you're able to play more lands out of your graveyard, bring back more things. Bloodghast just feels like that, so I don't want to really go into these effects. I'm going to go into some interesting things like the fact that, first of all, going into the flicker ability, whenever Celes enters, right? So whenever Celes enters, so that means we got an ETB effect. So we want to make sure we're using flicker abilities. Felia is like the recent hotness in modern in terms of like a really solid flicker ability. It has flash, so you're going to be able to bring it in at the turn before yours. So it's not going to be kind of in the way of what your opponent's looking at to remove. And then when Felia, Exuberant Shepherd, it's a white 2/2 legendary dog, by the way. When it attacks, exile up to one other target non-land permanent. So this is actually a great way to flicker maybe artifacts that you have, maybe enchantments that you have if you don't have your commander out. At the beginning of the next end step, so it is a bit, it's not an immediate flicker. Return that card to the battlefield under its owner's control. If it entered under your control, put a 1/1 counter on target on Celes. So notably, keep this in mind, this is actually a way to temporarily remove something. So this could be used in some group hug scenarios or some politicking scenarios where you need to get rid of something so your opponent can do something else. So let's say player 1 has something problematic out, you flicker it until it ends up, and then you tell player 2, okay, here's what I did for you. You can now cast your card without fear of that card. And now you owe me something, this card comes back, this is the best thing I can do. Otherwise, you're not looking to help your opponent, you can kind of flicker your own Celes and bring that back. Really, the card that I'd probably be looking at something like Ephemerate. Cards like this in white are something that I was really missing when I was building my Obeka deck. White has like some really solid like flicker options. But something like Ephemerate is like one of the best ones here. Exile target creature control, return to the battlefield under its owner's control. So you get that immediate flicker, but then the rebound allows you to do it back on your turn. So before your turn, let's say you're player 4, on player 3's end step, you can flicker your Celes, and then on your main phase, you can flicker again, get multiple discards going, get multiple things in your graveyard. So immediately that part's great. The next part of the text that I want to focus on is specifically discarding any number of cards and drawing that many cards. Now, you can discard cards through like cycling, but really what I want to focus on is Celes discarding cards. Now, you can also work around the idea of your opponent discarding cards. There are cards, especially for you Modern Hollow One players out there, such as Burning Inquiry, that makes everyone discard cards, and I think that's also valuable as well. There are ways that you can pay that off. So let's kind of let's focus on that part where Celes enters and gets you to discard your hand, because you want to make sure, yes, there are reanimation targets in your hand, cards with flashback, but are you going to be able to get something out of that once you do it? So specifically, Bone Miser is kind of nice. This is like the Waste Not analog, but specifically Waste Not, which we're going to touch on in a second, says your opponent. Bone Miser is the other way around. So it says whenever you discard a creature card, create a 2/2 black zombie. Whenever you discard a land card, add 2 black mana to your mana pool, so you get some of your mana back, which is kind of nice. And whenever you discard a non-creature, non-land card, draw a card. So you're gonna, I mean, with the Bone Miser out, not only are you drawing, let's say you discard 6 cards, you're drawing 7, but then the Bone Miser is going to trigger off of each non-creature, non-land card, drawing you more cards. So that's great. Waste Not is another option. I, again, just want to mention because it's like Bone Miser, but Waste Not is for your opponents. So if you are playing to the discard theme, if you're playing like Mass Reanimation, which we're going to touch on in a second, then Waste Not is a great way to pay off you discarding your opponent's stuff. So again, if you're in this deck, you're in red, you might be playing Burning Inquiry to maybe work around that forced discard on your opponents and have payoffs like this. It's an option. It honestly is like a funny little disruption in red, but again, Waste Not is specifically on your opponent. It may not be for all builds of Celes, but I do want to bring it up as an analog to that Bone Miser if you go in that direction. Now, the last card I want to mention is Surly Badgesaur. This one's a fun one. Whenever you discard a creature card, put a 1/1 counter on this creature, and then whenever you discard a land card, create a treasure token. It's kind of, again, it kind of feels like Bone Miser Light. And then whenever you discard a non-creature, non-land card, this creature fights up to 1 target creature you don't control. So in some ways, this could be a great way, you know, this creature has to fight something. So notably, this isn't a May, but this could be a great way to ram this thing into other things that maybe your opponent is not going to attack with, is not going to block with. It's a great way to have that removal. Now, notably, all these triggers happen at once. So if you feel like you're going to need your Surly Badgesaur to like one-shot something, you will have the land trigger, you will have the 1/1 counter trigger onto this creature. So you obviously want to order in such a way where you put the 1/1 counters on this creature first, then you're fighting stuff. And honestly, you probably want it so the 1/1 counters go first, then you get your treasure tokens, or like one or the other, but then the fight is the last, because then with that treasure token mana, maybe you have like a protection spell in white, like this creature certainly gains protection from something. That way the fights are like one-sided. And so that's how you want to think about something like this when these triggers are resolving. But I thought this was like a cool little, like, less, like, I feel like I've never come across this card. I was doing research for this video, and this is just like one of those cards that, again, Bone Miser, but like in red. So it's like very red. Again, you're creating treasure tokens, so it's kind of cool. Again, a discard payoff in all 3 ways. You have some self, maybe you're working with your opponent to discard, but again, 2 good options for yourself. See if you want to make your opponent's discard. Sometimes you don't really want to be doing that because everyone likes using their graveyard as an extension of the hand. Now, the last thing I want to touch on is specifically this part, Mass Reanimation. So Celes says, So, and I believe this works because of the wording. Someone let me know in the comment section bottom below if I'm wrong. But whenever one or more other creatures you control entrance, you control, not own, you control. So once they're on the battlefield, you control them. If one or more of them entered from a graveyard, any graveyard, or was cast from a graveyard, put a 1/1 counter on each creature you control. So you can go wide. Yes, I could extend this video and talk about 1/1 counter shenanigans, but I specifically wanted to bring up the fact that Reanimate is a good option in this deck because you can put target creature card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control from any graveyard, and this will trigger Celes. So not only if you have synergies, get your opponents to discard cards, not only are you getting them to do that, but if you have stuff like Reanimate, if you have reanimation spells that can get your opponent stuff, then it's also going to trigger Celes on that way, and then you're going to get that front side because you're probably discarding cards on your end. You're doing a whole lot of things off of Celes, right? And so Reanimate is going to be a great way to take advantage of that. I thought that part of the wording was really key. I believe I'm right on this one. Let me know if I'm wrong in terms of that Reanimation. And then finally, I want to mention Turgid. Come on, whenever an opponent sacrifices a non-token permanent or discards a permanent card, again, if you're making them discard cards, Turgid's just a busted magic card. Okay, I don't think I need to convince y'all that Turgid is a good card, but in Celes, it's kind of funny. Whenever they discard a card, so you might be having that Bone Miser Waste Knot shenanigans, you may put that card onto the from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. So it's coming from that graveyard onto your control. It'll trigger the Celes. Everything gets a 1/1 counter. So if you have shenanigans, if you have synergies with 1/1 counters, if you have abilities that sacrifice creatures and deal damage, such as flaying based on the power of a creature, you're going to be growing out your board. There are other black cards as well that, you sacrifice a creature and you deal damage equal to its power and stuff like that, or target opponent loses life and you gain life. Like, there's options like that in white and in black in Orzhov in general, and then some fling effects in red. And so being able to build out your board to a wide power, but also fling your opponent's own stuff at them is also really powerful, and just being able to reanimate them in certain ways with stuff like this is really powerful. Obviously, if you're playing this in Commander, Turgid's going to take the slot of a game changer, and so that's something that you're going to have to keep in mind when you're building out the rest of your strategy, if you're building into this Commander specifically. Now, that's where I'm going to stop the video there. I think there's like a million ways that I could go. There's a million routes that I could take. I just wanted to provide that base level glossary look at this commander. Let me know what you think in the comment section down below. Is this a commander that you're looking to build? Is this a commander that you're excited for? Is this a commander? Is this a character in the Final Fantasy lore that you're really excited to play with? Let me know in the comment section down below. I like what they're doing with Mardu in this set. I like me some reanimation shenanigans. I like me some free comebacksies, and I like when it says, you draw that many cards +1. I like going up on draw because that's not a common thing that you see in red. A lot of times it's even, might be under, but you don't really get positive draw, net positive draw when it comes to stuff like this. So it's nice to see that in these colors along with everything that this commander gets.